Often, the primary emotion that comes up for individuals who are cycle breakers is guilt. People believe that actually speaking to the ways that their family has hurt them is a violation of the family code. They believe that it is a way in which they are, in essence, being disloyal to their family members and hurting them. And there's also, survivor's guilt that's also a part of that experience. Like, I made it past these cycles, they didn't. And so, what tends to happen with emotions like guilt that go unaddressed or don't get processed and unpacked is that a person can actually lend themselves to their own emotion and go right back into the fire.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terry Cole Show, where I just had the most fascinating conversation with one of my friends and a brilliant clinician, Dr. Marielle Bouquet. She is an Afro-Dominican Columbia University trained psychologist, intergenerational trauma expert, and the author of Break the Cycle, A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. So we talked so much about the way that her approach infuses, it's more, the framework is very holistic, as is mine, but infuses ancient and indigenous healing practices into modern comprehensive therapeutic approach. And breaking the cycle, basically healing intergenerational trauma. She is an expert. So we talked all about how you could heal intergenerational trauma. I asked her all the questions that I thought you guys would want to know. I read this book. I think this book is an unbelievable salve that we need right now in the world. So if you are struggling with generational trauma, you definitely want to go out and get Break the Cycle by Dr. Marielle Bouquet. And in the meantime, I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed interviewing my friend. I'm super excited to welcome my friend, Marielle Bouquet, to the Terry Cole Show. Look what I'm holding, my friend.
She's beautiful in your hands. A beauty and a beauty. And a beauty behind you, too. So 3 beauties in one room.
Wow. Really, this is super duper exciting. So I don't even know where to start other than saying congratulations, because your book just dropped. And this is your first book, yeah? Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your experience of getting to this point of releasing. And for you guys, it's Break the Cycle, A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. Now, if this is not the mother effing book we need right now, I do not know what is. Like, we've so needed, and I know other people have talked about it, but I feel like this is comprehensive in a different way. So tell me how you got here, and if you would, a little bit about your life background that sort of got you to this place.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you for being so excited about this book with me. I'm thrilled that, the world gets to have it now, and that we get to do the healing that's really profound around trauma. And, the work itself and the work around intergenerational trauma really came to me while I was still a clinician in a medical center. And I used to always hear my colleagues in our clinic team meetings say, like, oh, well, this person, like, they're coming from having the experience of depression after suffering from domestic disputes for 10 years with their former partner. And their mother kind of, suffered the same fate, and their grandmother the same, and I kept thinking, like, we say this for years, we were saying these things. And I'm like, no one's calling it out. No one's naming it. What's this like elephant in the room that no one's like putting a name to? And is there a name? Right. And it kind of grew out of the almost kind of curiosity, one might say, maybe even like frustration of like, what is this? But that road eventually led me down the path of also seeing intergenerational trauma in my own life. And almost kind of like in a way where I was like, wow, I this answers so many questions.
Right.
And this is what the pain has been that we've been suffering here. So it's been very illuminating, both on a professional and a personal end.
Both places. So it's both. I mean, I feel like whatever we're driven to write about, because that writing a book is a whole effing thing. It's a whole thing. It absorbs your life. I don't know about you, my friend, but I felt like, and I feel right now, it's like being back in grad school, where anything else I'm doing when I'm in the middle of writing a book, I'm like, I should be writing. I should be
Mm-hmm.
writing. Is that your
Mm-hmm.
experience?
Absolutely. And I also thought that this journey was going to look a lot different than what it does. It's actually kind of lonely.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that part of it. Like, because most people don't tell you, like, you kind of have to be this person that's in a bit of a silo, thinking about these concepts, thinking about integration of information, ideas, research. And, it's almost kind of like you're walking this path alone. And I didn't like that at all. I'm actually somebody that's very relational, and I,
Me
I
too.
love being in community. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It didn't work. It didn't work for me. So I actually did something in the middle of my writing journey. I started giving people that I love chapters. So I
Yep.
sent a chapter to my cousin, one to my sister, one to my mentor, and I said, just hold this. If you wish to give me feedback on it, I receive it. But I just want this to be a book that I write in community. I don't want it to be a book that I write in isolation.
Yeah. It's a lot, especially because what we both write about are pretty heavy concepts, and it's psychological. So there's so much going on. So for you, let's just start. The book is for anyone who has a family. Let's just say that, okay? If you
Yes.
have a family, the Break the Cycle book is for you. So let's talk a little bit about, get clear about what is intergenerational trauma.
Intergenerational trauma is actually the only trauma that makes its way down a family line. It's passed down. And the ways that it happens is at the intersection of our biology, meaning our genetics and our genetic encoding, and ways that we kind of inherit biological data or genetic data from our parents that is reflective of their environmental stressors, the stress and the trauma that they went through. And the psychology of it all is everything that happens after we're born. So if we're born into a home where the cues to attune and to care and to nurture us weren't there, and that emotional foundation was not established to the extent that we needed, that already creates an initial fracturing. And then all of the rest of life comes in, right? We may go into the school system where things are tough, or move around a lot, or maybe we get bullied, and maybe our first relationship's pretty traumatic, and then we transition into a toxic relationship because that's probably what we saw growing up, and all of life then hits us, right? We already have this genetic predisposition, or like one might say, like just an emotional vulnerability. Maybe we might be more tender, and then we have all of these things in life that then kind of like poke at us and make it so that the trauma surfaces in our life. We get those trauma responses, which then makes the trauma intergenerational, given that our parents and us were trauma sufferers.
Yeah, and it's like the thing with unresolved or untreated trauma, we'll say, or trauma that you haven't looked at, is that then now it's very hard to know when, people talk a lot about being triggered, and we're also going to talk about that, but it's hard to make the distinction between, am I reacting to this person because of what they're doing actually? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I am, but maybe I'm having an amplified response to this person because they remind me
Yeah.
of someone who was unsafe, or someone who harmed me, or a punitive
Mm-hmm.
parent, or whatever it is. And I think that that's probably one of the most, it's so confusing, like for
Mm-hmm.
therapy clients, where they're like,
Yeah.
no, but my feelings are real. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, of course your feelings are real, but we have to be able to look at, are they amplified?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is some kind of a repeating reality,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And what that amplification, I love the word amplified, what that amplification is basically telling us, what's the data? Even in my book, I actually invite people to almost kind of take a little bit of a pause, maybe a little distance from the data collection process that they're engaging in when they're mapping out their family tree, when they're, engaging in the intergenerational trauma healing assessment that I have in the book, the intergenerational ACEs questionnaire that I also reflect in there. And all of this is a data collection process. So you almost kind of have to like zoom out, basically, right? Like just zoom out of the full process that you've now been engaging in, to really take a full look at everything that you've gathered so far, and offer yourself an opportunity to reflect on, where are the sources of amplification, where are the triggers, if you may, and how have those been reflected down my family line for generations and have been like modeled responses to stress? And
Mm,
how have I internalized those model responses unquestionably because they seemed like the norm?
and for us, if that was your family system, it was the norm. And so changing, right? This is what your
Yeah.
book is all about, right? Breaking the cycle and really giving us a step by step process of having a
Mhm.
deeper understanding of self, but also that you can be the one. Like the joy, what really amped me up so much about your work in this book is that it's so hopeful, right? Even though intergenerational trauma and trauma of any kind can
Mhm.
feel heavy and is a drag. Here's the thing: if you are experiencing this, if you have experienced this, the fact that there's a way to break the cycle is so uplifting. It's so like, okay, this has been rough, and yet I don't have to hand this down to my kids, and I can literally be the generation that stops that. So how is that for you, being the
Mhm.
generation that is stopping it?
I actually take a lot of pride in that. And I also take a lot of pride in the fact that I have contributed to seeing my parents in a place where they themselves have disrupted and broken cycles. My father, recently reflected to me that it was in seeing both me and my sister breaking cycles that he felt motivated to start doing some of the work himself. Yeah. And my father's 65. Sometimes we think, anybody like probably past the age of 25, like it's like, well, they're an adult and they're set in their ways. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
no. People
Mm-hmm.
can change down to the very last day that they're on earth.
Yep.
And I take a lot of pride in the fact that my parents, have been able to do some of the work themselves. And I even take pride in myself, like being someone that, is a couple decades into this world and have lived a lot of it in an extreme amount of suffering, high
Yep.
functioning suffering, but
Indeed.
suffering, suffering nonetheless. I kind of like ducks, like I'm definitely like a duck, like swimming, but like pedaling really fast underwater,
Mm-hmm.
treading underwater, and just live the life very much in that way. And I feel like, I do have a lot of pride in myself and being able to do a lot of the disrupting of those cycles of pain as well.
It's so beautiful, though, to see how your parents are inspired by what you're doing, the story you just said about your dad, because speaking of hope, like how the truth is, it really is never too late. And I found something very similar within my own family system, getting sober very young. And I was the youngest of four, and I stopped drinking when I was 21, when everyone was still drinking. My older sisters and the family was like, alcoholism, what are you talking about?
Mm.
No idea. And to see how many people I've dragged into recovery, and how far the family system has gone. And it speaks to the flexibility of us
Mhm.
throughout all of life, that if the circumstances are right and we have the desire, we can always make it better, or
Mhm.
get better in some way. And yeah, it requires a good coach, it requires a good text, it requires people who are in the field leading as you're doing in this area.
Mhm.
But the joy, I hope, for people listening, for people watching this on YouTube, is that this book is out right now. It's called Break the Cycle: A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma by Dr. Marielle Bouquet. I'm just going to say doctor. Um, and you don't have to, like, because a lot of times we're part of what I think the work that you and I both are committed to doing is evening the playing field a little bit around the
Yeah.
mental health world, because
Mhm.
not everyone can afford it. But we are putting out books, and this certainly is one that
Mhm.
can transform a life. If
Yeah.
you do it, if you read it, if you follow it, and follow you online, and all the stuff that you're putting out there, we can change our lives. So back to intergenerational trauma. Let's talk a little bit about triggers so that people can sort of recognize within themselves what are intergenerational triggers.
Well, we oftentimes talk about triggers as being an experience that only one person has. But the reality of it is that there are ways in which our parents or people that were proximal to us, anyone who had some sort of influence, especially in those primary years when we were
Mm.
still learning kind of how to orient around the world,
Yeah.
these people, whether they were conscious of it or not, were modeling behaviors. And some of those behaviors that were being modeled were how they responded to when they themselves were triggered by their environments.
Mm.
So if we saw a parent, let's say like mother, father, person who doesn't identify, as either, but is a caregiver, and they are every time that they have a really hard day at work, they're coming home and they're short fused and they're screaming out of the top of their lungs.
Mm.
Basically, in a nervous system state, they're probably in fight, right?
Yeah.
We're likely going to ingest that as knowledge as like when I have a hard day, the natural response will be for me to actually scream and yell at the people that I love,
Yeah.
individuals that have proximity to me and that I actually have access to discharge onto.
Mm.
So we talk about triggers in reference to it being a one person nervous system response, not realizing that it can also transcend generations because it has that element of modeling that's in there as well.
Right. And it's something that, again, until you've got to have some kind of macro view to go, I don't like this. I don't
Yeah.
want to do this. I mean, part of, if you think about the ways that you've changed your life, and I think about mine, you have to get to your own tipping point where you're
Yes.
like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be a
Hmm.
screamer, or I
Yeah.
don't want to be someone who's lying to cover up for what I'm doing, or whatever the actions are. And that can be the beginning of making the shift. But what do you find with your clients, though, Marielle? Do people like, do you find that there's a loyalty thing when individuals in therapy are wanting to change generational patterns? What comes up for them?
Very often, the primary emotion that comes up for individuals who are cycle breakers is guilt. People believe that actually speaking to the ways that their family has hurt them is a violation of the family code. They believe that it is a way in which they are, in essence, being disloyal to their family members and hurting them. And there's also, survivor's guilt that's also a part of that experience. Like, I made it past these cycles, they didn't. And so, what tends to happen with emotions like guilt that go unaddressed or don't get processed and unpacked is that a person can actually lend themselves to their own emotion and go right back into the fire.
Yep.
And so they go back into the cycle. They become a cycle keeper yet again. And
Yep.
they don't extract themselves because the guilt itself, which was the consequence of extraction or the consequence of holding their promise to themselves and to their family to break the cycle, that feels intolerable. So
Mm.
whenever we're talking about working through cycles, breaking from them, we have to also talk about what is the emotion that it's left you with, what's the remnant that's there, and how do we work through that so that then you can actually find the work to be tolerable and not, run back to the places that hurt you.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's so true. And I think that the whole thing about setting people up to succeed is basically having the conversation that you do and you teach in the book about expect that you're going to have some feelings
Mm-hmm.
about what is happening or about changing. And what I find is that other people have feelings too.
Mm-hmm.
So even the people who they say they want you to do it better, let's just say, but people are afraid of change, right? We know this is
Mm-hmm.
just part of the human condition. When you think about way back to like cave people days, right? Change was dangerous, right? You wouldn't want to be like, you wouldn't decide to like leave the pack because you'd be dead.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I feel like we have that natural fear of change. And then
Mm-hmm.
when in relationships, when people start changing, other people feel threatened or feel judged. Like, oh, I remember when I stopped drinking, and I was, keep in mind, a big drinking family. I was a senior in college. It was like the last 3 months of college. And I remember my mother, which of course she will never listen to this, so it's fine. But she, I think she likes to remember it differently. But what actually happened was
Mm-hmm.
I said, Mom, interestingly, my therapist thinks I'm kind of an alcoholic. I mean, she definitely thought I was an alcoholic.
Mhm.
So I stopped drinking. And she said, "Oh, Terry, I don't think you're an alcoholic. I mean, maybe you have a problem with alcohol, but that's not like," she just wanted to like paint, put some lipstick on the pig and be like, "It still looks pretty." And I was like, I don't know.
Mhm.
And then when I really did stop, and for that was 1987,
Mhm.
but this is maybe a year later. She was like, or 9 months later, I said, "I haven't had a drink in 9 months." Where I was at her house and we were walking down this country road, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me? Because we're actually very close."
Mhm.
And I said, "I tried telling you many months ago, but you didn't really want to hear it." Because
Mhm.
she also said in that conversation, "Listen, if you decide to stop drinking, that's fine, but it doesn't mean everyone else has to." And I was like, "Bitch, I can barely stop myself. Like, don't worry. I'm not worrying about anybody else. Like, I'm holding on by a piece of dental floss, lady. Don't
Mhm.
worry." But again, I know that it's not that she didn't want better for me. I know that it's the fear of change and the fear of conflict, and I'm going to
Mhm.
upset the homeostasis and
Mhm.
stop the cycle.
Right.
Even though she would consciously want me to stop the cycle, there is an unconscious, oh, we want to hold on to that familiar. So, have you had experiences like that with your practice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the tension and resistance is almost inevitable, and it is indeed a part of the work, which is why a lot of my work centralizes on how do we help you hold the tension, right? How do we help you like work with the resistance? How does it serve you to do that? Because if you're talking about breaking a cycle, that means there is a sustained effort to maintain a different way of being than what you come from, where
Hmm.
you've been, what you've thought of as the norm, what has hurt you.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to be doing that, we have to work with the hard stuff. We have to work with resistance, the guilt, as I mentioned, shame, which is a big one, right? Like there is,
Hmm.
and even sorrow, grief, deep grief, and grief of like, there is a concept in the book that I know, that I allude to more towards the end about there being two families that we have in our lives. There is the family that we thought we had, and I call that our false family.
Hmm.
And then when the veil is lifted and we have a better understanding of who is truly in front of us, it is this human being that carries their flaws, and they can be hurtful, and they may be invalidating, sometimes abusive, they themselves were hurt, like all the things. And that's our true family. That's the family that's really in front of us. And we can see them with clear eyes because our eyes have been open to the multitude of ways in which they have been able to exist in this world, even if those ways have been harmful and injurious to us. But now we see it.
Amazing. And then you have choices.
And then you have choices. And the choices, will either keep you in cycles or help you break them. If you're holding that boundary, is that boundary there to protect you from cycling back?
Yeah.
And if it is, hold firm to it, work through the resistance, metabolize that guilt and process it so that then you can see yourself on the other side.
So, for you in teaching this, what does it look like to work through the resistance?
Many times it looks like body-based work. So I'm very much a holistic psychologist and I practice with the body a lot. And the reasons why I integrate the body, in part, of course, because we know a lot of trauma is situated in the body, but also a lot of the resistance is too. When people are basically, if we take the example of like that person that's in guilt, right? They established a boundary and now they're in this profound guilt. Now they're no longer in that intergenerational loyalty, being loyal to the cycles that have recycled through their family for generations. Now they are the cycle breaker who is standing in their truth and is having to do the really hard work of literally staying there.
Hmm.
That means that guilt is actually also being processed in the body as an experience. They may have, tension in their stomach and like stomach problems. They may have a lot of like, neck problems and pain. And then they're also like feeling like almost like they're about to throw up, right? Like they just feel like
Yeah.
this immense internal pressure. And typically when we're talking about what people do that's driven by emotion, meaning that they just like they felt a way and they reacted, it's because they're not taking that pause to say, wow, this feels so heavy in my body.
Mm,
This feels so unwell to me. This is really hard to stomach, aka stomach problems.
mhm.
My entire nervous system is responding to this experience, and I don't sit with that well. But if we teach you how to sit with it better, if we teach you how to regulate your nervous system and bring back a process of feeling calm and at ease with the situation as is, then we're going to be able to help you hold that resistance. So that's in essence what the work looks like.
It's something that once you realize that the pause is such an important part, because you're so right. The action is the discharge, right? We just want to friggin' move on to the next. We just want to not
Hmm.
be here.
Yeah.
So whatever I can come up with really super unimportant things to do to not be here, or I could pick a fight with someone to not be here. Like there's many ways
Yeah.
of not sitting with this feeling.
Hmm.
And for the work that you do, how much mindfulness do you have as a part of your personal work and also as teaching Breaking the Cycle?
I am a work in progress, but I am very mindful. I
Yep.
I believe myself to be. I am one of those people that stops at the little things and savors them. If there is, dulce de leche is one of my favorite candies, and
Mm.
it's very popular in the Latin American world. And if I ever have a dulce de leche in my hands, I'm going to take a tiny bite, savor it, really kind of like mull over the flavors and the full, ways in which
Mhm.
my palate is taking it in. When there's a any kind of moon, I look up. I actually have, within my home, I have these huge windows, and I purposely decided to live here and purposely chose this wing of my building because you can see the moon.
Mm.
And every single evening, I get an opportunity to just be with the moon, just for maybe 60 seconds, and just like admire how beautiful it is that we get to live on Earth and actually have this beautiful view of the moon and sunsets and like these things that are just like free
Yeah.
for most, like we're just like we have it, and it's so beautiful. I pause and I reflect on my parents' laughter.
Mm.
When people hug me, I really take in the hug. I don't
Mm.
just like hug kiss and start talking. I just really take
Mhm.
it in. Like I take in moments, and that has really done so many. It just has had a positive influence on my mental well-being and also my feeling of feeling connected. I feel more connected to people. I feel more connected to earth. I feel more connected to the universal elements that we get to be exposed to. And then I also get to teach that, which is beautiful.
And how that changes people's lives, when just because really what you're talking about is being here now,
Hmm.
right? It's like the
Yeah.
moon is beautiful. It's coming up. It's like the last couple of days have just been insane, morning and night, gorgeous.
Right. Right.
And how the gratitude, because I feel like what you're describing, Marielle, it just reminds me of like sort of living in some kind of devotion to gratitude
Yes.
of what is right
Yeah.
in our
Hmm.
lives. What do we get to? As Jen Pasloff would say, we get to have this. And it's like we get to be in nature, or we get to look up, and it doesn't matter where you live. You can look up and
Hmm.
see the moon if you want to, if you take the moment. And what about meditation for you, or breathing practices or anything like that?
Well, every single day of my life, I meditate and I breathe, and I have been for a number of years. I don't know how many, but I know it's over 7.
Yep.
And it started off with just 30 seconds because I usually, when I talk to people about doing a meditative practice, it feels like this added task that you have to kind of tag on. And I started at the top of my day. As soon as I got up, I recited a gratitude list in my mind. I didn't whip out a journal or anything. I just said, I'm grateful for 3 things. And then after that, I segued into engaging in a breathwork practice. Now, I myself, being a sound bath meditation practitioner,
Mhm.
I get the lovely, gift of having plenty of sound bowls in my home where I can actually practice. But I also love being on the receiving end. And so I know you and I are both on Insight Timer, and I
Mhm.
love your course on Insight Timer. Oh, so good. And
Thank you.
yes. And I listen to Insight Timer myself. Like, I'm not just a teacher there. I actually tune in every single day to a different meditation, and I sit with however long that meditation might be and really, really like give it time and intention and try and separate from whatever my phone, anything. And that helps me. That helps me be a better daughter, better sister, better aunt, a better friend, a better practitioner. It has bettered my life on so many levels that I don't think I'll ever be without it. I think it's with me for life.
Yeah, I agree and have been meditating for like over 20 years, but it's like the thing that changed my life. I became a meditation teacher because it was so important. I started integrating it into my practice 15 years ago, 18 years ago, because in my own body, what changed from meditation, from having a dedicated practice, was I gained like 2 to 3 seconds of response time in like every situation. And I was like, wow, I'm not such a hothead. Like I'm not just hitting send on these like things because I'm pissed. It was like again, it's back to a created choice
Wow.
for me,
That,
you know?
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm gonna be saying. I hope you don't mind me referencing to what you just said a
Please
few
do.
times over in the future. That was beautiful, and it also hit me on a personal level. But also, it also is what I've seen reflected in my practice. My clients, especially like I think the hardest experiences, of course, a mother, child, even adult child, but sometimes when you're in a coupling situation, when you have a
Mhm.
partner, and especially if you reside with this person and you're kind of together a lot, and there's almost like this perception of like when there's conflict there's no escape. People people could really use those 2 to 3 seconds, and it is a gift. It's like it's a relational gift, it's a therapeutic gift, it's so valuable. And so I love the framing of that.
It's also a nervous system gift,
Oh,
right?
wow.
It's like we really are like soothing and preparing to, it really does. I mean, I also wake up and meditate. That's my practice, but it really does calibrate for the day, like make
Yes.
decisions. And gratitude too is just so important. And I'm going to switch gears for one sec. When I
Mhm.
asked you this question, that Kelly Corrigan, that I interviewed her and she has a show on PBS. She just was she's so fascinating. She's such a good interviewer. So I
Mhm.
stole some of her interview questions, but one of them I love is, who do you miss?
Oh, this one is an easy answer. It's my grandmother, and she
Mm,
is the person who I reflect in my book throughout.
mhm,
My grandmother, I actually did not grieve my grandmother's passing for maybe 2 years. I had no idea that this person meant that much to me until long after her passing. I just loved on her, right? Like, and she was a good person to me. But my goodness, I miss her so much so that every journal entry that I have in the recent past has been to her.
mm.
It starts with mama, and then I write.
So tell us a couple of things about your grandma.
Oh, you know, sh- short stature, big personality. And I love that about her. She was just, very wise. She had this beautiful long hair that she would always
Mm,
wear in a braid. And she had very like big curls. And I used to love like braiding her hair. She
mm,
also had this very dark skin that was completely even tone. Like her entire body was one tone, which was really fascinating to me. It was like butter.
Mm.
Um, and she had a big smile. So I think I get that from her. We smile really big, and our eyes kind of almost close when we smile.
So nice. So nice to remember. Part of what Carrie says about this question, and it's so true, and just seeing your face, is that when you ask, for folks to talk about people they really love, who they miss, basically, it's like you see it, the love you just got filled up with your love for her, and that just
Yeah.
flows through. All right, I
Yeah.
have one more question for you. For you, when it comes to boundaries, what has been your, let's say, most challenging personal boundary to create, and if you have created it,
Hmm.
or your biggest challenge, I'd say, boundary wise?
One big thing that is consistent with my parents, both of them, has been, and this is very cultural, but it doesn't negate the fact that it's frustrating. They
Hmm.
actually, they like to kind of like push something onto you.
Hmm.
So if I'm not hungry, they'll be like, but, and just like
Hmm.
really push. And if I, I have enough pajamas, but I bought this one for you. And so there's the pushing.
Hmm.
And so that, because it has so many iterations of what it looks like, it has been really challenging. Although I've been finally able to say it's the, kind of forceful, like, I am giving you something you must receive.
Yep.
And it all comes from love, which complicates it
Yeah.
because
Well, that
they are
makes it
loving
challenging.
me. Yeah. And it brings up the guilt,
Yep.
the old familiar guilt. So that has been like a very, like, almost a decade process. But, we have a little bit more gentleness with each other around it. And I
Hmm.
am, you know, while holding my boundary, I'm better able to hold it in a way that feels healthy for all of us rather than, you know, yelling, no, I don't want it. Like how I used to maybe in
Right.
my early 20s, now
Right.
nearing 40. And now I think I have a little bit more of those 2 to 3 seconds
Yeah.
and
Right
more
on.
wisdom. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, so tell us, you guys, this book is out right now. You can buy it everywhere fine books are sold. The author is Dr. Marielle Bouquet.
Yeah.
It's called Break the Cycle, A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. So what I want you to tell us is, where can we find you, please?
Yes. So you can find me on my website, drmarielbouquet.com. And my handle, kind of across the board, I'm usually, mostly on LinkedIn or Instagram these days, just kind of like dabbling in at dr.marielbouquet.
Excellent. Well, thank you, my friend. I'm so excited for you. This book we all need. You guys go out and get this book. You're absolutely going to love it. But thanks for spending so much time. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.